Hi, everyone. For those that don't know me, I'm Liz Wright, and I just wanted to come on board first and just give you a little bit of background as to how we ended up working with the absolutely amazing Leo Academy Trust. About 5 years ago, Fred and I started working together. Because we both had a passion for children's well-being and helping them learning how to thrive and flourish. And because of this passion, Fred went off and did a master's degree in positive psychology, and I went off and did a master's degree in character education. And nearly 2 years ago, Fred and I were commissioned by the amazing Challenger Multi-Academy Trust to come and work with a number of their teachers across their schools in developing their own character education and positive education research. Under the leadership of Seb Sagnier and Stephen Chamberlain, and with Fred's and my guidance and support, these teachers produced absolutely outstanding research utilising the action research method. Action research is probably currently one of the most common research methods for doing character and positive education, as well as educational research. And the reason for this is that action research is a form of self-reflective inquiry undertaken by researchers, in this case teachers, in order to improve their own practices within their own particular situations. So it's oriented towards this idea of problem solving. So you're doing the research in the classroom and you're learning from that research and perhaps discovering some new problems or some new issues or some new ways of doing things that you then cycle back and do some more research once you've kind of completed that initial stage. And I think definitely in light of what's happened this year, the teachers that have started the research at Leo are definitely illustrating this sense of or cyclical nature of action research, because they've certainly learned a lot, and we'll get to that in a moment. In terms of the coming to work with Leo, we did a wonderful event with the Challenger Multi-Academy Trust where we celebrated the amazing research that they did, and some representatives from Leo were there, and they became really keen to get us to come in and work with you guys and support you on your journey towards developing and contributing to the breadth and depth of character and positive education research out there. So Fred and I were commissioned to come and work with you. We set up the project. I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to hand over to Fred once she's had a sip of her tea to explain to you exactly how we worked with the teachers who got on board with the initial research.
Thank you so much, Liz, and good morning, everybody. What a great start we've got off to this morning with Phil's introduction and Andy's absolutely rousing introduction there to the day. And yes, so we've been working with the fantastic Leo team now since the start of the 2019-2020 academic year. And we started actually a little bit before that with doing an introductory session, which actually this conference kind of serves the purpose of doing as well for the next cohort that will be joining us out of all of you wonderful people watching today. So the first thing we did is we actually did a twilight session where we introduced action research, we introduced the work we'd done with the Challenger Multi-Academy Trust, and we talked through the timelines. And that then led to a number of interested people joining us for the first session, which is what you can see number 1 on there on the journey. And that was a half-day introductory workshop into character and positive education. And during that session, staff members were able to experience a number of interventions, try out things, play around, and also understand a little bit about the background and the scientific research behind positive and character education. And that really got their creative juices flowing, got them excited about doing their projects, and got them starting to think about what they might want to do when they started their research. The next stage then was a full day of inset on action research training. So that was all about the different types of research and data gathering, looking at things like qualitative and quantitative research, looking at how they might want to actually set out their projects so that they would be ideally placed to give them the best possible data to work with, where to find information for their literature reviews, so where to find other studies on the topics that they were interested in, how to refine the area they might be interested in. And also we did quite a bit of work on how to take all this data. You know, if you take a 20-page report that's been written by academics and it's quite sort of geared towards the scientific community with loads of data, how do you take that and pare that down to getting the key information out of it in 5 minutes so that you can actually see whether it's relevant to you or not, and whether you need to actually dive a bit deeper or whether you put it to one side and move on to the next one. So we did a lot of that. And what was really exciting is that within that first day, we took the teachers through to the point where they actually had a well-formed research question. That's not to mean that at that point it was set in stone, but they actually had a starting point. And we did that by helping them refine it, but they helped each other. They had lots of space and time to do that in that workshop. And it was a really exciting workshop where you could feel, you know, I mean, if you say we're going to do a day on research methods, most people would just go, oh, groan. But actually, I think Liz will agree, and hopefully those of you who are watching who were there will agree, it was actually quite a sizzling kind of day, because you could feel the excitement of people kind of thinking, oh, this is what I could do and this is how I could do it, and coming out of that with a formed research question, which was brilliant. So from there, they actually started doing their background reading and their planning for their research projects. And as you can see on the timeline, that's where things started to go a little bit skew-if for everybody, because that's when COVID kind of struck. It was somewhere between points 3 and 4. So when they were doing their planning, and some of them had actually started doing a lot of their research, and it was for most of the participants, it was actually when they were in the middle of doing their research projects that kids started disappearing out of school. And then eventually it was all remote learning. So points 3 and 4, stages 3 and 4 were quite challenging for our intrepid researchers. And I'm incredibly proud of the work that they've done, as I know Liz is as well. They've done some amazing work with some incredible challenges thrown their way on top of their usual teaching. So stage 5 was the report writing workshop, which was intended to be a 2-hour twilight session to help them plan their reports and look at what challenges they'd encountered in their research, how to report on this, how to kind of explain their data, etc. What it actually ended up being was a very, very hands-on 2-hour remote session supporting them through what the hell do we do now? We've got partial data. What do we do with it? How do we go forward? Can we work with what we've got? Do we scrap it all together? Do we start again next year? Can we integrate the two? And what we've actually found is that most of them could use what they've done and use it to refine what they're doing this year. So actually, in a way, the pandemic has helped them make their research better, because they've had the chance to take what they'd already done, look at what hadn't worked and what had worked, and refine it. And they can now put it into practice in their second shot. And then when they're putting their full report together at the end of all that, they'll have some fascinating data that's going to be unique in terms of the type of research that they've done. So from that, they went to submit some draft reports to me so that we could actually then do what we're doing here today and present their findings back to you. And then stages 7 and 8 were slightly, well, they were reversed compared to what we would normally do, because normally we would produce the final report and publish it and then come to conference. But because of the COVID disruption, what we've actually done is we're presenting interim findings to you today. And we're so excited about doing this. And then in the spring or early summer, there will be the final reports, which will then help disseminate the work that these amazing teachers have done, not just within the Leo Trust, but actually disseminate it throughout the education community in the UK, and why not worldwide. So that's where we've got to right now. So we're at stage 7 today, which is the annual conference. And before we do anything else and talk to you about the reports, I just wanted to really very briefly talk to you about positive education and character education in general, and why we're even doing this, because there has to be a purpose, and you know, what is the purpose of these action research reports? The reason we're doing this has always been important. It's putting well-being and character at the heart of education, and the Leo Trust do this so wonderfully. And that's why we were so excited to work with the Trust when they brought us in. But more than ever, we've seen now with the pandemic how absolutely essential this is. Every day I talk to teachers who tell me this, that, you know, what really matters is supporting well-being, supporting resilience, helping children have those character strengths, and adults have those character strengths that they need to get through these challenges, because this won't be the last challenge we face in our lives, I'm sure. So it's more important than ever. And what positive education and character education are is they're very closely interlinked. So I'm just going to share with you a little bit of what's been written about them. So Seligman and Csikszentmihalyi, who basically are amongst the pioneers of positive psychology, they put strengths and virtues right at the heart of positive psychology when they first introduced positive psychology to the world in the year 2000. So that's bringing in the character strengths right there. And then White and Murray in 2015 talked about what positive education is, and they said there were three components: the prevention of mental illness, the promotion of well-being and mental health, and character education. So again, these go hand in hand. And the Jubilee Centre for Character and Virtues, where Liz did her master's in character education, they describe character education as the skills required for human flourishing. And flourishing is what positive psychology is about. So again, absolutely interlinked. And IPEN, the International Positive Education Network, talk about the double helix. And here is the double helix. So it's the intertwining of teaching children to do well academically, but also to develop their character and well-being. And that goes absolutely together. And that's what these action research projects were about, bringing in the interventions, the practices into the classroom, into everyday activities that do this, and then being able to share the results of these with the world. Now, it's really important to mention a little bit about the concept of doing this school-wide and trust-wide, because we're talking today about interventions that are standalone within certain year groups, and that's really important because they form a part, and a very important part, of the big picture, but they wouldn't work on their own. And what's brilliant about the Leo Academy Trust is that they're bringing in this practice of action research to reinforce what they're doing, but what they're actually doing is integrating well-being and character into everything they do across the trust. And there's a little bit there about why it's so important. I won't read that out to you. You will have copies of these slides, so you'll be able to read it in more detail, and all the references on there are on the final slide as well, so you can go off and find out the original papers. But Public Health England in 2014 wrote about the importance of a whole school approach that includes the culture, ethos, environment, how you teach and learn, and also how you interact with families and the community. And again, the Jubilee Centre talk about character education permeating everything that the school does. So this is the context of the work that we've been doing. And having set that context, I'll now hand over to Liz to talk to you about the first bit of research done by Sally King. So over to you, Liz.
Thank you so much, Fred. Yeah, I'm so excited that I get to talk about Sally's work with you. She had this amazing idea for her project, and for me, being a bookworm and about reading, it was just really lovely to read about the points where she got up to and the learnings that she got through that initial stage of research. So Sally's initial project was called "How Does the Development of Self-Reflection in Reading Using the Language of Character Strengths Impact on Learning in Year 2?" To begin with, in the initial planning stages, Sally decided that she was going to focus on 6 character strengths. And these 6 character strengths were, were love of learning, curiosity, zest, hope, perseverance, and creativity. Sally decided to use a mixed method data collection approach using reading assessment data, initial reading reflections, and initial collection of which are the 6 strengths the children were thinking of as they were sitting down reading during reading time. As a class, she introduced them to the 6 strengths and discussed the meaning of them. She wanted to make sure that they understood what these strengths were. And she started working with the children on how they could identify these 6 strengths in the stories that they were actually reading. Sally also began to model the terminology of these 6 strengths through guided reading feedback and individual reading sessions. She was focusing on one strength a week, and before the pandemic had so far covered curiosity, perseverance, and zest. In terms of her initial observations, Sally was really excited to see that many of the children were starting to understand each of the character strengths and were starting to use the terminology of each of the strengths within the correct context. And the children were also responding really positively to the meaning of each of the character strengths. And I love the example that she shared in her initial report, where there was a child who was seen as being overeager and impatient to do their reading, but simply by reframing it within the context of character strengths, that child now identified as being a child full of zest. Children were spontaneously using the character terminology in other lessons during class discussions and peer feedback, which really illustrates the understanding that the children were developing on what these character strengths actually were and their meaning. And hope was the character strength that they started working on just before the initial lockdown. And Sally did make some initial observations in terms of this particular character strength, but obviously it was only kind of very initial light touch observations because of the lockdown. And this was or included a focusing more on their responses and showing more self-awareness around their own needs when asked what they were hoping to achieve within the context of their reading. So what next for Sally? Sally was only a third of the way through the research project when lockdown happened, unfortunately. And despite the positive outcomes, Sally, on reflection, felt that there were maybe too many strands, particularly with the character strengths within the research project. So in our kind of discussions, once lockdown had started, she decided that she needed to really narrow down her focus, which both Fred and I thought was a really good idea. She has a new class this year, so Sally is determined to learn from the issues, again, reflecting this idea of character education, of action research, I should say, as being a self-reflective practice where you kind of start the research, learn from any issues, and then come back and refine the research that you're doing. So she's kind of learnt from those issues, refined, as I said previously, by focusing in on one particular character strength, which I think will create a much more robust research project. On that note, the changes that Sally has made in terms of focusing in on one particular character strength, she's decided to focus on hope, especially within the context of the children reflecting on their reading. So Sally's new project has a new working title, and this working title is How Does the Development of Self-Reflection with Focus on the Character Strength of Hope Impact a Year 2 child's view of themselves as a reader and reading progress? She's still determined to use a mixed method approach to research, collecting both qualitative and quantitative data. And in exploring just the single strength of hope, she's providing opportunities for the children to self-reflect on their reading using hope to set their own targets and goals, and really reflecting on how they can develop that feeling and action of hope towards their reading. Sally's project is such a lovely exploration of how using character can help us reflect on and attain goals in reading. And like I said at the start of me talking about Sally's report, I'm a real bookworm, so I'm really excited about this project. And I really have a good feeling that it's going to be really successful for Sally. Everything that she's learned from the initial research will support her in running a more robust and specific piece of research that I'm certain will be helpful for all teachers working with young readers. I'm now going to hand over to Fred, where she will talk to you about Tia Bullen's research.
Thank you so much, Liz. And it's always fascinating, even though I've read the reports, it's always fascinating to hear it all back and see what amazing work has been happening. So Tia was really keen to explore perseverance in Key Stage 2 children, as she sees this as an essential part of supporting learning, being able to persevere through challenges. And she wanted to see whether perseverance could be improved by bringing in interventions over a period of time. So she started off by doing a thorough literature research, looking at the importance of children understanding that frustration and confusion are normal parts of learning. And that's a big learning point, isn't it? To understand that it's not always going to be easy when you're learning something new. If it was easy, you wouldn't be learning. So she looked particularly at Angela Duckworth's work on grit. She looked at Carol Dweck's growth mindset, and also Guy Claxton's perseverance progression map. I always have to, it sounds like a bit of a tongue twister, that one, doesn't it? Perseverance progression map, but there you go, I've managed to say it. So the project was with her year 3 pupils. She had 26 pupils there, and there were 3 main steps. The first step was to set the children an impossible challenge, in inverted commas, and she gave them 20 minutes to do this, but they could give up at any time, and she would record the time it took them to do this. I'm going to show you the challenge because I'm going to set a challenge to you. After today, you'll have a copy of the slides, or you can also look this one up online because it's quite a well-known challenge. It's called Sam Lloyd's famous trick donkey puzzle. But you can take the slide, print it off, and then cut along the dotted lines. So there is the trick donkey puzzle. You end up with 3 pieces of paper. And let's see if you can do it in less time than the children, or if you just give up straight away. You have to put the riders on the donkeys, and yes, they do have to be the right way around. You know, you don't ride a donkey sitting underneath the donkey. Just saying that, putting that out there. So good luck with that one. I'll say I'm really, really rubbish at persevering with that kind of challenge. When I first came across this, I gave up after a few minutes, and I was throwing the paper around going, no, I'm not doing that. That's not my kind of thing. My brain does not work that way. So I think the children actually did a lot better in their perseverance. So back to Tia's research, that they were set this impossible challenge. And then they were introduced to the concept of perseverance through videos and discussion. And they were then asked to self-assess themselves in terms of where they thought they were with perseverance on a 6-point scale, ranging from I give up before I've even started to I always persevere. They were then not subjected at all, they then did a number of interventions over a period of 3 weeks in groups of 15. And these included things like the learning pit, where they found out that being stuck is part of the learning process. They learned about growth mindset and what perseverance looks like, and what kind of strategies they could put in place to help them persevere when they're learning. And also they saw perseverance modeled throughout every day through the Think Aloud teaching method, which I'm sure Tia will be able to tell you a lot more about than I can, but about verbalizing your thought processes so that you can actually talk through the challenges. And on top of that, they had a daily recognition ceremony at the end of each day where they nominated each other for their perseverance. And they had to be very specific about this. So Tia would keep them on track with their specificity to make sure that they were actually praising perseverance. And every child who nominated someone or who was nominated also got recognized and praised for doing that. And at the end of each day, additionally, one child out of all the ones nominated was chosen for the Leo Academy Don't Give Up sticker, and their photo was placed on a Perseverance Award poster. So there was lots of that praising the process going on that Carol Dweck talks about. At the end of the intervention, they were set a different impossible challenge, which was a riddle that they saw on screen. At this point, they were actually being taught from home, so this happened throughout halfway through their project. They redid the self-report questionnaire, grading their own perceptions on their perseverance, and they also wrote down some self-reflections on the whole thing. Their results were quite interesting. So none of the children actually solved the puzzle within the 20-minute time limit. But what was interesting is that they actually pretty much, the majority of them, increased on their self-reports how they saw their perseverance. Nearly 60% increased by one descriptor, but quite a few also increased by 2 and even 3 descriptors, how they saw their perseverance. So their perception of how good they were at persevering had increased. Now, when it came to the puzzles, they actually did a lot worse at the second puzzle than at the first one. And there's a few reasons that Tia gives in the discussion of her report that she could see on that. One is that the first puzzle was probably more engaging, and also that the second puzzle happened online remotely. So as well as being less engaging, it perhaps just wasn't a fair test because of the difference. So next time she wants to use 2 more closely related puzzles to have a fairer comparison. On the self-report, she said it sounds great, you know, that they all improved, but it's worth bearing in mind when you do research like this that it's possible that because they knew it was a project about perseverance, they wanted to please her and they wanted themselves to feel that they'd improved, so they actually reported themselves higher. The intervention wasn't very long, so maybe any improvement won't be deep-seated or lasting enough, so that's something to bear in mind as well. And also the fact that they were in the middle of a national crisis when they were doing this may have increased their perseverance scores and their perception of perseverance anyway. Now, in terms of Tia's observations, she noticed that as they were doing the daily award ceremonies, the language they used became increasingly specific about perseverance. They became more and more adept at recognizing and discussing characteristics of perseverance. So she noticed an improvement, and their reflections were really interesting too. And one child said, "I stick with problems a little bit longer than I used to, for example, when we do tricky stuff in maths lessons," which is exactly the whole point of why Tia was doing this research. So it's hugely encouraging. So Tia is keen to repeat this and gather more data, and she will do this taking into account what she's learned so far, and she'll do it this academic year with her Year 5 students. So I can't wait to read the final report on that, and then for us to share it in the actual written reports with the world. So I'll hand back over to Liz now to talk about Laura's work.
Thank you, Fred. I just realized then that I was still had my mic off, so it was lucky I remembered to pop that back on. Yes, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Laura Weeks's original project or initial project that she started just before the whole lockdown and pandemic that happened. Laura's initial project title was "What is the impact of negative behaviour on the attainment and self-esteem of peers in the classroom?" For Laura, the aim of her project was to see whether or not poor behaviour has a negative effect on attainment and self-esteem. Laura wanted to ensure that children with negative attitudes towards learning were being given every possible chance to become possible learners. Laura set up the research with 2 control groups. Each control group was focusing on a different aspect and answering different questionnaires at the end of each day. Thus far, Laura's project has worked, or she's worked with the first control group, focusing particularly on the days where behaviour was more negative. Her aim was to start the second control group answering a different questionnaire that focused instead on the negative impact of behaviour on other pupils. So if there were pupils in the class who were expressing negative behaviour, what was the impact on the other pupils in that class? The plan was then to introduce a weekly intervention between the 2 control groups, giving them an opportunity and space to discuss the impact of negative behaviour on their learning and self-esteem. Laura was also considering looking at an extra step within the research, which again is illustrating this kind of self-reflective practice of action research, to address the role of the teacher in addressing and managing negative behaviours and how this affected their ability to ensure an equal education for all members of their class. And then, of course, the pandemic and lockdown happened. So for Laura, initial observations included that children were extremely aware of the behaviour of those around them and would often feel that they could not achieve their full potential in class when being distracted by classmates who were perhaps less eager to participate in the learning process. Children displaying negative behaviour were aware that their behaviour had a negative impact on their peers, but did not understand the full consequences of their behaviour. And then, Laura couldn't continue on with the research due to the pandemic and lockdown, but she's hoping to start again this academic year, kind of taking on board all of the learnings that she's had with that initial stage of the research project. In Laura's literature review, she raised the point that those engaged in less negative behaviours in primary school were more engaged with learning in secondary school, showing the importance of the type of research that she's actually doing, which is obviously to ensure that every child is having the opportunity to learn and engage with the learning process. Laura also spoke about how children who are victims of bullying have lower attainment. And that the research shows that negative behaviour and low-level disruptions do have an impact on other behaviours. Therefore, I feel that Laura's research really has such a fantastic potential to contribute to the richness of research in this particular area. And it will be really interesting to see as she kind of develops her research project and kickstarts it again this academic year, what the results will be at the end. And I'm really excited to see the final report once it's all done. I'm now going to hand over to Fred to talk to you about Paula Holmes's research and Melinda Young's research.
Thank you, Liz. And yes, before I do that, I also wanted to say I can see that there is a question there from Rachel Townsend. So I'm sure that Emma and Graham will be able to bring that up for us at the end when we do the Q&A. And if you've got any other questions about anything we're talking about today, the work we've been doing, or about character education and positive education in general, then obviously do type them in, because we will be able to answer them as we do the Q&A session at the end of this. So I'm going to talk about Paula Holmes's work. So Paula had only just got started really with the proper research when the pandemic caused an awful lot of disruption. So her findings are very, very preliminary, but really exciting so far to see what she's done, and I can't wait to see what more she does on this. So Paula's work was also on perseverance, like tears, and she wanted to specifically look at the impact of perseverance on achievement in the girls that she was teaching in her class. So by the time the disruption hit due to COVID, she'd started doing a bit of work on growth mindset with them. She'd done the initial assessment with them, but she hadn't actually properly started doing the perseverance work, and unfortunately hasn't managed yet to do the follow-up assessment task. So we don't know what changes there would have been after the perseverance work. However, this is where she will pick it up again in this academic year, looking at perseverance in boys and girls in the year 1 group that she's teaching now, and she's going to film the assessment task as well, so that she can time them and see how they actually persevered, and look at their behavior while they're doing the task as well. So the task itself, the assessment task as a benchmark, was to build a tower from cards. That was the task she gave them, and she did this with 10 girls in her class. So I won't be talking about percentages, because obviously a 10% change would only be 1 out of 10 girls, so it can skew those percentages quite a bit. But I'll talk about the initial findings from the data she gathered to start with in terms of individual girls. So before the task, most of the girls were actually quite positive about the task and their day at school. So 5 out of them reported being excited, and 4 of them said that they were really happy. So that was a very positive thing. Now, what was interesting is that after the task, only 7 out of the 10 reported positive language about how they were feeling. 1 of them was upset and 2 of them were frustrated. However, the happy score had gone from 4 to 5 girls. Now, this is where, of course, having done the perseverance work after the initial assessment and then redoing a challenge assessment would be really interesting, because perhaps they were feeling frustrated and upset because they hadn't learned yet that failure, frustration, feeling confused, all of those things, as we saw with Tia's research, that they are a normal part of learning. And of course, the work that Paula wanted to do with them was for them to learn about that. And so it would have been really interesting to see what happens afterwards words, but we will see that when she does this with her year 1 cohort. And I'm really excited to actually see that with children so young as well, and see what the outcome of the research is. Now, in terms of their focus, it was really good. 6 out of 10 girls didn't talk at all during the task. They were absolutely focused. What they didn't do really well is ask for help. Only 3 out of the 10 girls asked for help. However, when Paula offered them help, the 6 out of the 10 girls were quite good at taking it. So again, maybe part of the perseverance work that she will do with the year 1s this year might be about, how persevering also includes asking for help. Who knows? I'll be really interested to see that. Actually, only 1 of the 10 girls built a tower, but all of them, no, the majority of them did build something, just not necessarily the tower they were meant to build. So they did actually give it a good go. And the majority of the girls, 4 out of the 10, actually took 10 minutes on task. And the range was from 1 to 2 minutes all the way up to 10, which was the longest. So that's as far as Paula got, but I'm really excited to see what she does with the year 1 girls and boys in this academic year, and to see actually what happens in terms of changes after she's done some perseverance work with them, which is of course where the exciting part really lies. And so I'll move on to Melinda's research. Now, Melinda had an interesting task because Melinda didn't have a class of her own to teach. And this is something that I'd like to really stress before Liz later on talks about the timescales and the journey that you will go on if you join us on the next cohort of the research. And that is that although we're seeing research projects here that are pupil focused, and we're seeing mostly projects that are done by class teachers, if you're sitting there and thinking, well, I don't teach a class, I'm a senior leadership, or I work in the office or in the kitchen, or I come in and teach music for 2 hours a week, it doesn't matter actually. You can still come up with projects to do. And also the projects don't have to be pupil-centered projects. Character education, positive education is also really important, as we were looking at earlier when I introduced the concepts, as a whole school. So it's also about staff well-being and staff character development. So if you're thinking, well, I'd like to do something with staff, then by all means, come and join us on the project, because there is lots and lots that you can do. It doesn't just have to be you as a class teacher. Now, what Melinda did is she borrowed a class for her project. So Melinda wanted to look at the impact of mindfulness activities, specifically free drawing and mandala coloring activities, on the anxiety that pupils felt before tests. And so she chose to do this during the SATs practice tests, the SATs mocks in year 6, and she borrowed a class of 30 pupils to do this. Now, during that week, that was when we eventually went into the first lockdown. And so during that week, parents were starting to take children out of school because they were worried. So she started with 30, children started dropping out as the week went on, and then we went into lockdown. So by the end of it, she had 13 children. And as any good researcher, the only data that she has used to actually report her findings on was for the 13 children that were present for the full 4 days of the research project, so that it's the most accurate that it can be. So her hypothesis was that either doing a free drawing activity or a mandala coloring activity would reduce anxiety or increase calm in children before a test. And she also hypothesized that there would probably not be much difference between the free drawing and the mandala coloring activity in terms of the impact. So to measure their anxiety, she used something called the short STAI, which is the State Trait Anxiety Inventory, which is a shortened version of a longer questionnaire, and this has been designed to be used by children. But she adapted it a little bit to make it more familiar by adding emojis to it. And the way the questionnaire works is it has 6 statements that are very straightforward. So statements such as I feel calm, I feel worried, etc. And children rate themselves on a 4-point Likert scale for each statement. So the points are not at all, somewhat, moderately, and very much. So they all did this on day 1, and then went off and did their first SATs mock. And then on day 2, they came in and they picked an envelope at random, which gave them an instruction to either do some free drawing or to do a mandala colouring activity, which would have been in the envelope. And whatever they picked at random on day 2, they did for days 2, 3 and 4. And so days 2, 3 and 4, they did their randomly allocated drawing or colouring activity for 5 minutes in silence. Then they did the self-assessment STAI questionnaire again, and then they did their SATs test. So these are the results that Melinda found. Overall, by the end of the 4 days, there was an increase in the level of calm reported by the children. In terms of the worry levels, those were, the number of children that reported being worried was pretty stable all the way through the project. And also how relaxed they felt didn't change an awful lot. So she felt, in conclusion, that based on her findings on a very limited number of children, but also based on the previous existing literature, that there is some evidence to suggest that doing a free drawing or a mandala colouring activity before a test may increase feelings of calm and reduce anxiety. Because most of the children that were left that actually completed the 4 days had randomly selected the free drawing activity. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to compare the two activities to each other in terms of impact. So in terms of the discussion on this that Melinda wrote up, she felt that maybe where there were pupils that reported being more worried or upset as time went on, this could have, of course, been impacted by the increasing worry around the pandemic and what was happening around them, and all of their friends going off, leaving schools, and then, of course, the lockdown being implemented. Also, for those that were quite calm and relaxed anyway, they knew there were mocks, so this may have impacted on the fact that they were perhaps not as anxious as they would be for real exams. And also, she said that the teachers at the school, which I think is quite common across the trust, were very, very good at preparing the kids and making sure that they were calm and relaxed and not particularly anxious about their SATs, and saw them as part of their everyday lives. So there weren't massive anxiety levels to start with, so it was quite difficult to see massive changes, of course. And also she posited that it may be that the children became more relaxed as the week went on because they were more familiar with the testing regime. So a lot of confounding factors potentially in there, as you will find if you do any research and if you read any research, that always happens. And the important thing is in your discussion of the research to just acknowledge those so that you know that the findings might have been impacted. So future directions for this, Melinda would love to, and I would too, and as would Liz, to see this repeated perhaps on a bigger scale in more schools, to see if this is actually something that can have an impact, if we can reduce the level of anxiety children feel when they're doing free draw or mandala colouring activities. She would love to see whether there is an actual difference between the two activities, whether one's more effective than the other. And the important thing there is also looking at control groups. So if she were to run it again, or if somebody else wanted to pick this up and running again, a couple of things that she's considered is that you might want to either have a third group of children that either have no activity at all, although that could be a bit awkward if they're just sitting there for 5 minutes doing nothing. So the alternative would be to give them perhaps a totally unrelated placebo activity, just to see if that makes a difference, or to run it with 2 classes, and for one class to do no activity but just the STAI test every morning, followed by their SATs, and to see whether they have any different results to the ones that do the colouring or the free draw activity. And yes, that's it. Oh yes, the other one was obviously it might be more accurate to do it with real exams that matter, but as Melinda accurately pointed out in her discussion and future directions part of the report, that wouldn't be highly ethical, so probably not a good idea to start testing on children, experimenting on children when they're actually doing real exams that matter. So that's the final part of our report findings from the amazing researchers, and Liz will now talk to you about the process that you will be going through and the timescales if you join us. And I really, really hope that lots of you join us for the next cohort. You'll have plenty of time before we even get started. So things will have settled down with the pandemic by now. You'll be in a better position, hopefully, than the researchers have been in that have done it so far. And the ones that have done it so far have done an amazing job despite the circumstances. So I have no doubt that you'll be able to do some great work. So I hope you'll join us. And here's Liz telling you a bit about the journey that you'll go in.
Thank you very much, Fred. Hopefully, I want to echo what Fred just said, that you've seen the potential of character and positive education research, and that hopefully it's perhaps kickstarted some ideas. Maybe there's been something you've been wanting to try out in your classroom anyway, and maybe it's about thinking, well, can I make this part of a research project? Or perhaps you've heard some of the research that's been happening with these teachers that Fred and I have been talking about, and maybe it's sparked an idea of how you could take one of these research projects further. So, even if you have just a tiny spark of interest, definitely reach out, ask more questions, and see if it's something that you would actually be able to fit within the timetable and make it part of your classroom activity. And hopefully I'm going to tell you the timescales for the next cohort of researchers, and hopefully this will give you a better idea of how you might be able to make this fit in with your classwork and or your wider schoolwork. For example, as Fred said, you don't have to be a teacher to be doing this research. You could be working in the office or the kitchen or be part of the SLT. So the timescales for the next cohort go like this. So in April-May 2021, there will be an introduction session run by Educate to Flourish on character and positive education. In June-July 2021, there will be training on action research. So, Educate to Flourish is not going to leave you in the loop. You will have a full understanding of what character and positive education is, and how to actually implement action research. In summer 2021, participants will do their background reading and research preparation. And in the autumn term of 2021, participants will start to carry out their research projects in school. In November and December 2021, Educate to Flourish will hold a training session to help staff write their reports. And then in January 2022, it seems so far away right at the moment, but trust me, it'll probably be January 2022 before we know it. Participants will then submit their reports to E2F, or Educate to Flourish. And then in spring 2022, the research report will be released before the Easter holidays. And then when in 2022, the next Leo Academy conference, annual conference happens, that's when hopefully you will have an opportunity to present the reports on the research that you have undertaken. So, you'll get plenty of support during this process from Educate to Flourish as well as Leo Academy. And I really hope that you consider taking up this opportunity to contribute to the amazing breadth and depth